my starting point would be to acknowledge the overwhelming body of science that now tells us that we are into a period of massive ecological overshoot. And it's not just in terms of the loading of the atmosphere with greenhouse gases, it's also seen in the way in which the biodiversity of the planet is being rapidly depleted, the way land use is changing fundamentally across the globe, and now at the same time we're depleting key natural resources, whether that be in the form of fisheries or indeed oil, which is now coming through in the price that we see at the pumps. All of those things are not operating separately, of course, and the climate change and the biodiversity loss are inextricably linked, so is the resource depletion. And if you put those two alongside different kinds of economic stress that are now apparent, you can see that there's a very complicated picture emerging that doesn't look good. And in answering that question, are we losing the race against climate catastrophe? I would say that my answer is, I don't know, but if you look at all the evidence and look at the evidence from parallel debates going on, I think you'd be hard pushed not to conclude that we face a very serious risk and some really big challenges going forward. And some of those challenges are really immediate and really urgent. And I don't think I'm alone in seeing some of the things that are now happening to food and fuel prices as being inextricably linked to this wider picture about ecological change. So we have an enormous challenge on our hands, but I wouldn't be inclined to say that we've lost. I think we have some big difficulties ahead, and if you look at the climate change issue, I think the numbers coming through there now in terms of critical thresholds of greenhouse gases, likely temperature rises, and some of the impacts of that in terms of feedbacks. To avoid the worst of it, we've got 10 to 15 years, I think is where the scientific consensus is now at. So that's a vanishingly small window, especially if you look at the momentum behind those ecological trends in the form of growing human consumption, built in part upon growing population, but also more importantly on Western living standards now being adopted in many countries in the developing world, China and India most obviously. But countervailing all of that, I think there is a parallel set of changes going on that you only register if you look at them over a period of a few years. And some of those things are seen, for example, in the changing political consensus. And one of the things that I've been personally involved with in the last couple of years is trying to forge a political consensus here leading to new legislation on global warming. We're about to see that enacted in the form of the new Climate Change Act. That probably will become an Act of Parliament here this year. It will be the first national framework in the world to put a legal requirement on governments to reduce greenhouse gases in line with the most recent science. And Michael was quite right in drawing attention to a couple of shortcomings that remain there in terms of the reduction target still being too weak, critical sectors being excluded still, aviation and shipping, and I hope everybody in the room will be joining the campaign in the next couple of months to make sure we close those loopholes before this historic opportunity passes us by. But I think, you know, notwithstanding some of the difficulties with that legislation, it is an incredible step. And when we launched that campaign 3 years ago, a lot of people said, well, this is a bit pathetic, isn't it, really? You know, we're not going to get it. The government's never going to agree to this. Some of the opposition parties are still sceptical. But we did it. 200,000 people took action. Some of them just wrote a simple postcard. Some of them wrote to their MPs. Some of them went to surgeries. A lot of them did the most important thing of all, which was to change their mind. A really important piece of activism. Moving from a disengaged member of the public to somebody who sees a problem and wants something done about it. And don't underestimate the importance of that, of changing the public mood. And I think the fact that that climate change bill is about to turn into an Act of Parliament is not so much to do with the lobbying process in Westminster, it's about the mood changing. And you can see it elsewhere as well. So from transition towns to Ashton Hayes, to people changing light bulbs, to shifting markets, there is a process going on right now of consumer behaviour shifting. You don't see it immediately. 4x4 sales are beginning to drop. People are no longer buying patio heaters the numbers they were buying patio heaters a couple of years ago. It's a subtle and modest shift, but I think it is signalling something much deeper, which is much bigger, and which we need to be building upon. And I think when you look at these kinds of environmental challenges, and the climate change one stands alone, there's no doubt about that. It's orders of magnitude bigger than anything else that green movements have tried to address. But if you look back 20, 30 years ago, and some of the issues of water pollution, of toxic pesticides, of acid rain, of ozone depletion, of air in many cities being unbreathable in the Western world, a lot of those problems now are much less serious. Some of them are being managed to almost a solution. That's an incredible change in perspective that took place partly about politics, partly about technology, hugely about public demand. And I think that's something that we have to bear in mind in terms of how we now address this issue. Because you don't get change like that. It's not going to happen this week or next week. It will take a decade maybe. But we're already well on the way, and I think that's why, in answering this question about climate catastrophe, we have to be optimistic. And I think this is the key thing. Caroline said this. I'm convinced now that this is the key point we've reached in this debate. Because we now have won the argument. There's a few nutters out there, like Nigel Lawson, still writing books saying that, it's not true, we shouldn't be too worried about it. But these people are in a vanishingly small minority now who really can be put into the category of nutter. And I think that's where we should leave them. Let's not give them the pleasure of debating with us and giving them respectability about the science. It's moved on. And now that it's moved on and we have this cross-party and cross-society consensus of the scale of the problem, I believe now the way to engage people is to talk about the possibilities rather than the threat. And Caroline said all this a second ago. So it's about jobs. It's about economic security built upon a more efficient economy. It's about development and ending poverty with different kinds of technology and different kinds of development trajectories. It's about better health, more secure food, about stronger communities and nicer places to live. That, I believe, is now the way we have to talk about climate change, because we have made the breakthrough in understanding that we have actually a problem to deal with. And we couldn't take that for granted. Even 3 years ago, I would still be spending a lot of my time on a Saturday, not having debates like this, talking about solutions, but still arguing with people who denied that we had a problem. It's changed, and in 5 years' time it will have changed again. And I think if we can work now to create the conditions whereby people not only think and change their mind that we have a problem, but they think and change their mind that in solving this problem it's going to be better. My children are going to have a better future, I'm going to have a nicer and more secure life. If we can do that, we will win. And I think this is now the front line in terms of how I see the climate change debate. It's not about policy, it's not so much about technology. Both of those things are absolutely crucial. Now the challenge is about human psychology. And I think if you just wonder, just for a second, to yourself, about how people react when you put a very bad and very scary thing in front of them. What do? Do they run and embrace it and say, I want to solve this? Most often I think they run away and they hide and they try to put it out of their mind. If we want to attract people in to dealing with this, I think we have to put things in front of them that are attractive, that they want to walk towards. Humans are infinitely flexible animals, and we've built over many millennia the ability to deal with almost any threat, problem, by putting it into the box. So if it doesn't affect me, there's an excuse that it's someone else's problem, or worst of all, to deny the problem altogether, or perhaps to think it's unsolvable. We have to deal with that psychology head on by giving people the impression, the correct impression, that it can be solved, it is my problem, and actually by solving that problem, life's going to be so much better. And I do believe this is now the historic moment for us to seize that positive agenda, and I'm sure everybody in the room will be doing their bit to make sure that in 5 years' time when we come back here, we won't be talking about if we can solve this problem, we'll be talking about how quickly we're going to do it. Thank you.